All right, let's kick off. We are back. We are at EODF 2024.
Good to see you, Damien.
Thanks, Tim. Great to be here.
In Milan.
In Milan.
Italy.
Yes, that is the correct Milan. And we are here with Simon Davies, who is a member of EODF and has been working in org design for a long time. I won't say how long because I don't know the exact number, but
So we just say over 20 years.
Yeah,
Over
20 plus years experience.
20 plus years experience across the UK, North America and Europe. And I'm really looking forward to digging in particularly about collaboration in org design.
Oh, yeah.
And so I'm going to answer this as my first question. Where did you start to tell us your story about where you came across org design and your first sort of glimmers of interest in the field?
Well, I started my career in general management in business, so I came into this field from that direction, really transforming teams that were underperforming or not performing as well as they should, and learnt by trial and error what worked and what didn't. Tried some of the faddy theories that people would come up with, read a book and try some of the things. Some things work better than others. And I kind of learnt by experience. Then as my career developed, I got asked to go into more senior positions, looking at organisational strategy and governance. And from that, I started to enjoy working with leaders that were trying to transform their part of the business, and found myself in the field of being a consultant. Not that I ever harboured an ambition to do that, but that's kind of where I ended up. And I found I enjoyed doing the work, actually facilitating groups and helping leaders be successful.
You had a bunch of experience in different continents. Have you just travelled for work with different customers, or have you had a chance to live in other places and work in different cultures?
When I was younger, my family moved to Germany, so I lived there for 4 years in my teenage years, which definitely played a big role in changing my worldview, because I was a kid from the UK, brought up in the UK system, and suddenly I was taken out of that environment at the age of 15, and you had to sort of learn a new language, learn different culture. You're an outsider, and I guess it teaches you a bit of humility as well, that you kind of have to take a step back and find your way. The other interesting thing was I was thrown into an environment where expectation was high, in terms of there was no limit on what you could achieve if you worked hard enough, and your destiny was in your hands. So that's part of my philosophy as well, and I think it goes for organisation life too. But for my work, I've been based out of the UK pretty much ever since then, and all my travel has been to work with different clients around the world.
You mentioned transformation, and that comes up quite a bit with org design. Can you give us a feel for the types of transformations you've been involved with?
Okay, so yeah, I think that the T word is a very overused one, and I've worked with organisations trying to do everything from we're doing really well in the marketplace and we just need to get ourselves into a state where we can continue to do even better, to we are in real trouble, there's no future for the business, we need to radically change things if we're going to find a future for ourselves. I worked with one industry where they were doing pretty well at what they did, but the CEO and a couple of their senior executives had recognised that the way the world was going, there wasn't going to be so much demand for what they did in the future, but they didn't know how that future was going to play out. So the challenge for them was, how do we configure our organisation so that we can tap into trends and rapidly assess whether they've got some traction, and configure organisational forms that are going to enable us to drive value from them. And it was quite an interesting way of thinking about solving that particular problem, rather than how do we make ourselves more efficient, get a bit more kind of out of the people we've got, maybe cut numbers, things like that. The project can be quite different, and transformation really for me it implies some kind of big change, and it will depend on the situation you're in. And that's why I don't like the T word so much, is because it's situational, and what's a big change for one person's perspective is not that much for another.
Yeah. So when you are at, I won't use the T word, but when you are looking at something that's quite a large amount of change for a significant organization, and there's a realization that we really need to adapt because this is existential for the company. How do you approach something like that from the beginning, where you know that there's going to need to be a large impact across many people? How would you start down that process?
I have a fairly fundamental set of principles that I operate by, and it's not the way every leader wants to lead change, but for me, people are at the heart of this. So I like to use collaborative change approaches. It requires leaders to really commit to that and to stay the course and expose some vulnerabilities as well. But fundamentally, I believe people support what they help to create, and a lot of the wisdom, know-how and energy that you need to really fundamentally change organizations already resides within the organization if we can only tap into it and find a way to release it in a directed way, so that it's directed towards, the energy is directed towards achieving the goals we want, rather than dissipated across kind of conflict or working at cross purposes.
If I was listening to the podcast and ran an organisation, let's say 500 people, and I'm looking at my organisation and feeling some of those things around maybe performance, or the market's shifted, or we have to take a new product to market, and I'm thinking, we're going to have to do some work to make sure my structure aligns with our strategy moving forward. If I'm not naturally that collaborative, can you make that practical on how would you have that conversation with that leader or that executive team when you're talking them through, hey, I'm coming in to help you lead through this change? What are the practical things that any leader could start thinking about in terms of getting buy-in for their direction rather than just top-down control?
I'm glad you mentioned my other word, buy-in word, which is my pet peeve, and if I can use fruity language, because I am a Brit, the bullshit word, the buy-in. As a leader driving change, you have two options. You can go for compliance, which is, I'm going to tell you what we're going to do and you can follow me, and if not, you can get off the bus. Or commitment, which is, we're going to work this problem through together, we're going to find a solution, and we're all going to go together. One's a pay now strategy, one's a pay later strategy. So you've got the choice, and I always say this when I'm talking with leaders, so let's cut the crap and get down to it, is you can make some fast, quick progress by having a small group of people in a room, figure out what you think is the right answer, and then go out into the organisation and try and make it so. That's when you're going to start paying. So you'll get fast start, then a long tail of trying to persuade people, trying to police people, trying to enforce what you're trying to do. Or you can invest that time, effort and resource up front with getting data, looking at options, tapping into creativity of people, and then whatever you decide to do with that, the implementation of it is going to be faster and smoother because everyone kind of gets what we're trying to do and has some equity in it because they help create it. Now, that's not a free-for-all or everybody's got a vote in how things go, because the leader has to set the direction. So they set the requirements, the constraints, the parameters that we're working within, so that everybody's efforts are directed towards how do we achieve that. But the challenge for the leader in practical terms is, rather than thinking in solutions mode, is to think in outcomes mode. What is it we're trying to change? What is it that's going to be different as a result of whatever we do? And try and open the space up for different possibilities for how you might get there, so that you, before you make a decision about one particular direction of travel, you've got your options that you can select from, because people might come up with something that you hadn't thought about that might be even more effective.
I'm imagining if I'm a leader in that position and I was thinking about a more collaborative approach, that could be very confronting. The thought that people might air opinions which I see as dangerous or harmful. There could be information revealed which maybe is going to hurt people's productivity. There is a siren going off. I'm sure that's coming across on the podcast.
They're almost here to get you.
Yeah. That was a close call. It could be very scary if there is some information shared which suddenly could harm morale and make the situation even worse. There could be other things that I really feel like it becomes out of my control in that sort of a situation. What would you say to that leader who's feeling those concerns?
I'd say they're legitimate concerns, but no change is risk-free. A lot of your choice is situational. So I certainly would see if you were in a turnaround situation where you had to make rapid decisions because the survival of the company is at stake, or there's really confidential information, then you'd have to think, is a collaborative approach the way to go, firstly. So you've got to be practical about these things. There's no one size fits all. There's no single right answer to this. But let's assume it's not that sort of situation. The sensitivity bit around sharing confidential information, potentially opening up discussions and debates, I think they're going to happen whether you like it or not, right?
Yeah. With you in the room or without you in the room.
With you there or without you there. And so this is why I come back to the buy-in word. So organisations are great at fooling themselves that if we just decide something, we can tell and sell people into committing to it, and then people will play the game and nod their head when you're there and then go out to the room and go, it'll never work, and there's no commitment to it. I would say there are risks, but the other side of the coin is not risk-free either, and it's about being pragmatic about what situation are we in, how quickly do we need to move. And by the way, I've worked on organisation redesigns, collaborative redesigns that are done in timescales of weeks, not months and years. It is perfectly possible to keep in control of the process by setting clear parameters and requirements and getting people involved in the appropriate way, and to do it rapidly. But it does require that commitment to do it.
What does that process look like to a fly on the wall and in an organisational design scenario? How would that fly know that this is a collaborative endeavour or not?
What you would be seeing is it's almost like a decision tree. So you're making a set of decisions you phase the work, and you're making a set of decisions in each phase that start to guide the work of the following phases. Mm-hmm. And you would normally start with a smaller group of people making some big strategic level decisions. So typically these would be the senior leadership of the organisation that are setting the rules of the game, the lines on the playing field that we're going to play within.
What would an example of that be?
As I said earlier, they'd be setting things like, this is the strategic direction, here are the priorities, this is where we're going to play, the markets we're playing in, not playing in, this is what our formula for winning is going to be, without getting too specific. Some maybe expectations on size of the organisation. Are we going to be twice as big as in 5 years' time, or are we going to be half as big? So you kind of know the constraints and parameters you're working within. And then in the following phases, you start to get more and more people involved in coming up with options for how you would meet those requirements. And then as you get closer to operationalizing your design, you're getting more and more people involved. So the idea is, as the white space, the sort of the area that people have freedom to operate in, becomes narrower because of the decisions taken in the earlier phases, the more people you can engage in the process without losing control of it.
We're at a dinner party and someone asks what you do for work. How do you explain this org design career you've created for yourself?
I have the equivalent of my family asking when they were younger, what do you do? And then their eyes glazing over as teenagers as you try to explain to them. I would say I help organisations fulfil their purpose by being really practical in translating. I see a lot of strategic intent statements and fancy words on posters, but getting into really practical terms, what does that mean? What does the organisation have to be able to do to deliver that strategic intent? And then engaging the people, the hearts and minds of the organisation to mobilise and create their own future and deliver it. So it's about helping those organisations to be successful in meeting their purpose and their strategic intent, whatever that may be, whether they're a for-profit or a public service or a charity.
What would be the things that an organisation, the fire alarms going off or the symptoms that they're seeing, which would be the point where someone needs to get involved with org design?
I mean, there's lots of them, but if you're seeing kind of high levels of employee dissatisfaction, high levels of customer dissatisfaction, you're losing market share, that you typically see calls for lots of initiatives like we've got to train people, we've got to pay our people better, we've got to put customer retention programs in place. These are point solutions for usually something that's a more fundamental problem, which is a misalignment somewhere in your operating model design that means that you're not well fitted to deliver on your strategic intent. People think, well, if we re-engineer the way the work works and leave everything else the same, that's the answer, or we retrain, reskill our workforce, that'll make the difference. And usually it's something much more systemic than that you need to sort of get underneath the hood, as my American colleagues would say, and kind of see what's going on a bit deeper.
Coming back to something you said earlier in the statement, what's an operating model?
Okay, well, that's a really good question, because lots of people have different opinions of what those are.
How would you explain that to someone that's leading their couple of 100-person company? And it's, what's an operating? Like they're thinking the same.
I heard about that, but I don't know what that is.
I heard a consultant once talk about that
at a dinner party.
Yeah, for me, an operating model is a pretty fancy word for describing something pretty prosaic, which is it's the work that you have to do. By work, all the activities and decisions that are made in creating value for the end customer, whoever that end customer is, and whatever we call value for them. It's all of the tasks, activities and decisions that go into creating that value, because that's the only thing at the end of the day that creates value, is the work that we do. Then the other leg of the operating model is how we organise people and resources to do that work. And then there's another leg which is how we manage and govern that work and those resources and join them up so that we connect them with our strategic intent and that we make the work flow efficiently through the organisation. And then finally, thinking about how we're going to measure performance, how we're going to recognise the performance and the behaviours that we need. And it's almost like the recipe, those are the ingredients. So the operating model is the sum of those ingredients. And if you get it right, you've got them all working collectively together to create a synergy. And when you've not got it right, some of those things are not working optimally and they're impacting on all of the other elements.
I'm sure you've even seen those things fighting against where you want the organisation to go.
Sure. And things like we want accountability and creativity in the organisation, and then you see management systems which are getting people to fill out timesheets for accounting for every 15 minutes of the day, or they're not empowered to spend more than £50 or $50, and you go, your management systems are not congruent with kind of the behaviours and the culture that you're saying you're trying to create in order to achieve your strategic intent.
How do you encourage leaders to think about org design success? Do you help them? Obviously, they're looking at what their strategic intent is and what they want from that process, but how do they know that they can feel good about the tail end of an org design project or process or culture?
Yeah, so for me, you have to start with the end in mind. I think as a leader, you have to put some markers in the ground around, as I said before, what's going to change as a result of this? Indicators do I want to shift? I don't think there's a kind of a ready-made basket of measures, but typically we'd be seeing organisation leaders coming in saying things like, I want to affect things like my efficiency, I want to be able to grow faster, I want my people to be more engaged. So before we even start work, I would be saying to them, map out what are the outcomes you're trying to achieve. Not necessarily smart objectives, but what's going to change, what's going to be different.
Yeah.
And then I would ask the question, how would we know? So you start to get into what sort of things what measures might be telling us that we've actually achieved something. So you can create a baseline and then start to see how have we impacted these things. But it's normally several indicators. It's not just one thing. So if you're thinking all I want to do is alter one performance indicator, then probably doing org design work isn't really where your head's going to be at anyway.
Yeah, more of a system.
It's more systemic, more holistic, more fundamental. Yeah.
A bit of a curveball. If you could assign yourself a new job title, what would your job title be for what you do?
That's a challenging curveball. I think really to do what we do as kind of organisation design consultants, working in a collaborative approach now, rather than going in telling people how to do it, as it were, you've got to be a bit of like a tour guide for. I described it the other day to someone. Is you know all of the places you've got to hit on the tour, but sometimes you've got to be adaptable. You're going to take your party down one way, you're going to go via different places. So you are a bit like a tour guide going through the journey that leadership team and the organisation are going on, where your job is to help them make the right decisions at the right time and make sure that they're having the right quality of conversation, but you don't have the answers for them. So you're just there to show them the route, and they can enjoy the journey and visit and get as much out of the places you'll visit. I probably stretched that metaphor too far now.
No, I think org design tour guide works. That's really good.
Yep.
That's really cool. Cool.
If people are interested in what you've talked about today and want to learn more about you or about what you've spoken about, what's the best way for them to find out more or get in contact?
They can either find me on LinkedIn, by all means reach out.
Fantastic. And how would a leader listening in know that they're a good fit for the style of consulting you do?
If they've got an appetite for opening themselves up to different possibilities, they don't think they've got all of the answers, that they're willing to have a bit of vulnerability, as we talked about, and they know what success might look like, but they are open to different routes to get there, then that's a good fit. If they think they've got an intractable problem we've been trying for years to solve and never quite cracked it, that's probably a good indicator that a different approach might be helpful.
Simon, thank you so much for joining us on the Org Design podcast. It's been such an interesting discussion. I really appreciate you letting us ask so many questions. I'm sure it's interesting both for the listeners that are joining us, but it's been super interesting for us. I know we've both been bouncing off each other with questions.
It's been a pleasure, and I've enjoyed answering the difficult questions you throw my way, including curveballs.
No, I think it's been the most important thing for us is it's important for our listeners. I think there's been some really great, practical, helpful topics for them. So thank you for joining us, Damien, and to all our listeners, thanks for joining us on the podcast. Have a great rest of the day.